All right, welcome back to Moonstruck right here on Riot Radio. I'm your host, Ryan, and where we discuss the topics of self expression and personal development on this show. So, today we're going to be continuing with part two of our concepts from last week, just outlining, the days of the week and what they really mean, especially when we talk about this concept of time and karma and cyclical movements of life, right? So, as we know, there's 7 days in a week and it repeats and, it goes on each year. But understanding how that kind of originated is pretty important for us just to get understanding of like how we move through the world and how the systems are constructed around us, and not just social systems, but even the mental systems of how we view the world is important. So maybe we'll start off just covering again the days and their meanings and associations with the different spheres and whatnot, and then later we'll get into the sins and the virtues associated with these aspects of the planetary spheres. So first we'll, I guess, cover the days of the week really, and how their names kind of tie into the meaning and how they translate into these planetary objects. So, first, obviously, we can talk about Monday associated with the moon. And I'm just giving a brief overview here of last week. You could always go on YouTube or search on DC Media Hub to find part one. But essentially, the moon is the first planetary sphere which we'll cover, and it's associated with the lunar cycles, feminine energy, creative energy, sexuality, sensuality, all this feeling, emotional polarity, right? So this is typically what the moon is associated with: expression, and what they would call a sense of home, or where your emotional foundation is. So if you have a good, I guess, atmosphere of feeling around you, this is what helps support this sphere in relativity to your body. I don't know if maybe we can just get the light body picture up again, just to kind of illustrate. So this is the second center there, but it's the first day in the week, Monday, obviously, and we'll get into obviously the other ones, but it's not congruent with the order that the days occur in, just because there are some, I guess, discrepancies between how they present themselves at what time, and I guess the order that they come in. So obviously the second is Tuesday, which is associated with Mars, planet of war, war god, and essentially is affiliated with military affairs or combat or overcoming obstacles by sheer force of will. And it's tied deeply to the concept or the element of light, the light bringer, we can say. He's connected to the third eye center, and this kind of interacts with all these other centers as well. It almost acts as a mediator. They talk about the third eye center or the pineal gland as the seat of spirituality, but it's really the crown, you could almost say, is that supreme higher divinity state of being. But the third eye is where you, I guess, step back from the creator to identify yourself with your I, which is your individuality. So your individuality as a being of the creator. So the crown is the highest center, which connects you with divinity. The third eye center is what connects you with the divinity that is now within yourself. So, and that's the almost mediating antenna which helps you align. So, but this is that center which can really go to the extreme lengths to act very precisely. If where you even observe what's around us, light is all around us. So light is pretty much the primordial force of creation, and that's why in stories like the Bible and various religious texts they refer to light bringer and all these, and fall in heaven and rebellion and whatnot. They're talking about concepts which are very pivotal to source of creation. So that's Mars tied to the center, and that's Tuesday again that it's associated with. And next we go on to Wednesday, and this is interesting because this center is associated with the solar plexus center, which is again associated with willpower. This is the act of basically expressing yourself in the material world. So not in the spiritual world, but in the material world, and it constructs your mentality, and is associated again with the Archangel Michael, Archangel with the big sword. So he is essentially the one who can cut the threads of karma and remove that which is inhibiting the divine plan. So, and this is talked about in the story, when the rebellion in heaven happened, Michael was the one who led the divine forces of heaven against the opposition or against the adversary. So he is the, almost, you could think about if you were in court. I think I made this analogy in the last part of this two-part episode, basically, that he is the defense when you are in court, or in karmic court in this case, right? So, you can almost think of the third eye center and the angel Samael, who's affiliated with that, as the prosecution, right, in court. This is the defense, the one supporting you. So the ability, I feel like there's a big correlation with this center, and the two centers, how they interact, are very interesting, especially when it comes to like the element of fire, which the center is associated with, for example. It's very interesting, especially since this center is your will in the physical realm, so it mediates almost it's the first step to that bridge of the divine, but it's the realization within the self. So a lot of times when people go through like spiritual awakening or processes, they first awaken this center, like the kundalini, the primordial force of creation that sits at the base of your spine. It'll start vibrating like this, and then it'll move up through the root chakra and through the sacral center, and then it'll go up to the solar plexus or the heart center, and it'll usually stop around that area. Personally, I myself have experienced this, so I'm talking from experience at this point. And then typically, later in your development, you'll reach a higher state of awakening where you have connection to the divine consciousness or divine cosmic energy, in which all the centers then become opened, and the higher centers are then opened, and you have greater awareness and connection to higher spiritual forces, basically. So this is pretty interesting. And another thing about Michael is that he is considered the strongest angel in heaven and the first angel in creation. So he is the original one. He is the first son of the creator. So very pivotal, very important to understand that that is essentially the seat of the mentality that you have in the physical realm. He's the force that governs us. And again, when we talk about angels and all these forces of creation, mainly what we're talking about is looking at them through the lens of just like a force, like gravity is a force, or light is a force, or electromagnetic force is a force, or electromagnetism is a force, or nuclear forces, the weak, strong. These are all forces. They're just forces that are associated with certain type of consciousness. So it's somewhat different, but in essence, or kind of summing up around the center, this governs karma. So this governs the cycles that you repeat. So almost like if you have a habit of, let's say, you have something you like eating that is not good for you, or like you have addiction like to drugs or alcohol, and that's part of your mentality or how you move through the world. This governs that repetitive process because it becomes part of your mentality. So, but when you break the link to your mentality, then you're free to explore new pathways in life and think in new and different ways. So this governs mentality, and it's really important to be able to express yourself at this center, because it really governs the divine will that you have here on the planet. And Mercury, as we know, is the closest planet to the sun. So very, very interesting. And as I said, the connection between the third eye and the solar plexus is pretty interesting when you think about the concept of fire. And even you see Michael with his flaming sword. So that's this is one thing that I was trying to remember while I was going on and getting a little bit episodic. But essentially, the if you know what, I'm gonna shout out to all the guys who watch anime out there. If you've ever seen Inuyasha, and you've seen, like, when the Tetsaiga breaks, but then the Tetsaiga gets reforged, and the Tetsaiga is like now too heavy for him to hold up. Essentially, like, this is what happens with this center. When you take on more karmic baggage, you do have more potential energy within yourself, but it becomes harder to hold up your sword. So essentially, relieving yourself of that karma by getting stronger, or raising your fang to a point where it's stronger than your father's fang, is essentially the aspect of this center becoming able to overcome that point of karma, so you can become stronger and hold up your sword. So you might have to face off against some big dragon or whatever to accomplish that. But that's actually interesting. You could see that similarity in, like, Inuyasha, where he battles this big dragon, and then the Tetsaiga becomes lighter, and he could use the wind scar, and then he learns the backlash wave technique. So that's pretty interesting, because when you're talking about, like, pivotal concepts here to what is even depicted in, like, religious texts, for example, like, you see sword and you see dragon and you see combat. It's like the same story playing out in, like, anime versions. So it's pretty interesting when you see this. But essentially, the concept is the same around this. It's releasing karma, right? So it's the ability to overcome a certain point. And then when you do overcome that, you can move through the world with unfazed agility, pretty much. You become almost like Goku when he goes Super Saiyan. You're just enveloped by aura. So that's what happens when you break these karmic tides that are bound up in the lower centers. So that's why I explain so much on this particular spot, the solar plexus center, because it really connects you to a higher state of being. And they even talk about, like, when you try to attempt astral travel or anything to do with out of body experience, or activating glands in the body which are not usually active or have become dormant. This is important because this center is what helps build that connection and restore the body and reforge the connections. And again, this is tied to the center of the liver. It's tied to the basically filtration system of the body. So that's why it's tied to fire, because fire purifies. And then going on to the next day in the week, Thursday, this is associated with the crown center. And this is interesting because the solar plexus and the crown center actually have a unique bond, because the solar plexus represents the highest aspect of self-enlightenment in the body, which is why typically when you go through first awakening, the Kundalini force travels up to the solar plexus or the heart. But when it awakens again, and when it fully awakens, when you have a permanent awakening, it opens to the crown center. And the crown center is associated with Archangel Tazadkiel, and he is actually one of the archangels that are in the Bible said to go into said to go into battle with Michael during the time of basically the great battle, or either the final battle or the first battle that occurred in heaven. So both of them, essentially, Archangel Tazadkiel was there to assist with offering divine mercy, which is the ability to be alleviated from your sins. And that's why it's typically associated with bliss. If you ever see yogis and they're all blissed out, this is why, because they talk about bliss is essentially pouring down from this center after you have opened I think they refer to it as the 1,000 petal lotus or whatever. So again, this is all like interesting stuff when you can make these connections, because there are a lot of connections between what is talked about in these books and what we can see in various like films and depictions of art, for example, or media. So understanding that there's always a connection there, if you're willing to see it and willing to look, is important. And again, perception governs what we see and how we move through the world, so that is also a factor, like bias or whatever. But essentially your consciousness operates on a lot of those principles. So you'll hear like a lot of people talk about like self-development or like self-hypnosis or meditation, or especially self-hypnosis, because they're trying to use it to be directed towards a specific act or learning a skill. They'll say lie to the subconscious mind, because the subconscious mind is almost like a tape recorder. It plays back what it hears. There's nobody really in there. It's just the imprint that goes on the mind over and over again, right? So by kind of understanding that principle, you tap into a deeper aspect of consciousness by seeing that, okay, there's a part of my mind that functions without consciousness, or without I guess as much consciousness, so it operates more on instinct or more on the rules of repetition and I guess instinctual behavior, right? So just understanding those things are important. But if you're going to tell the mind a story, it might as well be one that you like, because if it's not, then all you do is you got a bad story playing, right? So or even if you have a good story playing, if it's not a story that is in line with the story that you want, then you gotta rewrite the tape, essentially, right? So again, this is the crown center associated with Archangel Tazadkiel and Thursday, and why the yogis have so much, they're all blissed out. This is why. So that's that center. Friday, which is actually the day this is taking place and airing, is associated with the heart center, which is associated with essentially planet Venus, love. Also, I didn't mention crown center is also associated with Jupiter, which is in fact the strongest has the strongest magnetic field in the entire solar system. So when you connect to this center and when you access that state of bliss, you are at a state of connection, because you are pulling from the creator force of the universe. You're pulling from a source beyond light. You're pulling from the cosmic energy. If you've seen Avatar: The Last Airbender, not the crappy new version, but like the OG version, the anime version that everybody grew up watching, like when Aang goes to the yogi and the yogi's teaching him how to like open the centers and whatnot. He's talking about like, when you open this center, you're going to be connected to, pure cosmic energy, and bro can go into the avatar state anytime he wants and whatnot. So essentially it's the same principle, that when you connect to that. But again, that is Jupiter, and that's why you see like Jupiter has the strongest magnetic field. I think it also has the strongest gravitational field as well. This is of course excluding the sun and just relating to the planets. But again, of course, the sun is associated with the planets in this outline. But in essence, counting out the moon and the sun, the Jupiter has the strongest magnetic and gravitational field in the solar system. So always good to tie science back into what we're talking about, because a lot of the time some of this stuff can get too out there for people who are not always like down the rabbit hole. But the idea is to walk on the line between the rabbit hole and between the reality which everybody else is connected to, because you don't want to be in a reality in which nobody is in but you, and you don't want to be in a reality which everybody is in and you think like everybody else. So you have to find that line where you establish yourself as an individual, right? And when people talk about exit the matrix or whatever, this is essentially what they mean by that. This finding your own individuality and finding your own expression of self within the self, so you can carry that into the other aspects of reality. So heart center, this is the center that then opens and lets the cosmic energy flow through the higher centers into the solar plexus and provides it the, I guess, like the cosmic energy that fuels that rejuvenation process. So without this center being open, you succumb to emotions of, like, being hurt, or, maybe you're in a relationship, or you love somebody and you felt betrayed, or you made to feel closed off from the world or something like that. That typically closes the heart center. But when you find like self-love and acceptance within yourself for things that have happened, and become at peace and unity with that, and see that those things, even though they're part of you, they're parts of you which you should accept because they have brought you to the place where you are now, then you can find acceptance and unity within that and say, okay, well, I've accepted that, but I'm not that person that I was. I'm the person who's learned and grown from that experience and has transcended those aspects of the self, so I can become who I am. Right? Because it's easy for like anybody just to have like power, but it's hard for somebody to go out there and get that power through struggling. If you look at Goku, even if you look at like Dragon Ball Z or Dragon Ball Super or whatever, right? How many times does Goku get beat up, but then he comes back in the fight, right? Like, he'll get knocked down like a bunch of times, and then he'll, like, even if you like talk about like Goku versus Jiren, right? Like, how many times did it take before this guy like figured out how to get to Ultra Instinct, right? It took him quite a little bit of time during that fight to actually get to that point, right? But the premise is that you need that kick from life to actually engage that part of your system to take you to that next level. Because if you don't have that catalyst, then you just say, okay, well, I'm at this plateau, but you don't even realize that you're at the plateau because you don't have that drive to kick you to that next level. But if you say like, okay, well, like, damn, the whole universe is on the line, or all the universes are on the line, or whatever, or everything that I have built is on the line. We're almost talking about like Vegeta's pride here, but essentially it's the same principle. Like, everything that you have built, you have to think about that as that is the aspect in which you are I guess fighting with. So understanding that, and understanding that once you have experienced those things, you can go to a next level. So this is what happens. The heart becomes hurt, and then you overcome that hurt or accept it within yourself, and then you become the person who has overcome that, and now you're even stronger than you were before. If like, I don't know how many anime references I'm gonna make in this episode alone, but if you've seen OG Metal Fusion and like the second battle between Kyoya and Jinga, there's this moment where like Jinga's losing all hope, and like partway through the fight, he's like essentially absorbing all the power in which he gets hit with during the fight, and that's like the catalyst that lets him like rejuvenate essentially exponentially and win the fight, because he's like, oh yeah, when I took in all the power you had, it allowed me to become stronger. And that's the same way it is in the rest of life, right? And if you don't have this heart center open, this is why Jinga is MC in this show, bro. Is because the guy fights with like a pure unhurt spirit, right? And even when it gets hurt, bro gets back up. So that's essentially what's happened there. Once you allow yourself to be hurt, you can overcome that hurt and transcend it or transmute it through the solar plexus. You basically light it on fire with your aura, and then you just go to a higher state of being. You kick it up a notch, essentially, right? You find that deeper why within yourself, and you can go to a next level. So, but first you need to take in all that stuff that is being thrown at you, right? So It's pretty cool process actually once you think of it, because it really alludes to that concept that your power is limitless and it's only limited by the power of your own heart, right? So, and when we talk about also too, I just want to cover this now that we're covering the heart center, that because we're going to get into the sins later in this episode. When we talk about, things like in spirituality, they talk about possession and, exorcism and whatnot. When you have like beings of karma around you, or lower forces in the astral, like hungry ghosts, vampiric beings or entities, or essentially like beings that want to feed off your energy, this is where they try to attack you. They try to leech off the heart center, or they try to block the heart center basically. So, and what that means essentially is that the shape within your own being becomes distorted. And you know even in Evangelion, for example, they talk about this concept that, the AT field or whatever is represented by the shape that man takes on within his own heart, right? So if you take on a beautiful shape within your heart, then you're going to be able to express yourself fully. But if it's distorted, or it's not stable, or it's corrupted in some sense, then that projects to every aspect of life. So this is why a lot of the times you see monks, they typically like meditate on the center using, the typical Gyan mudra or whatever. So, or like essentially the center associated with the, or chakra, mudra associated with the heart center, because that's what they're doing. They're trying to alleviate karma, connect with the heart center, blah blah blah. So that's that center essentially. And when you form the shape in your heart that is desired, or when you're able to connect to it, your aura or your magnetic field basically becomes intensified. You're able to allow that energy to flow, like in this diagram, up through the base of the spine, through the heart center, through the crown, and back around. This is what like is talked about in like physics and whatnot. Like here, essentially, this is like, again, I'm no artist here, right? So, but this is essentially like you, me, and every other person on this planet, here we go. So this is essentially you, me, and everybody else on this planet. You got this auric field around you, bud. And like essentially when that's working properly, because like, you're connecting with all the divine aspects of the self or whatever, you got this like big field that essentially can, like, I wouldn't say beat back, but it can either attract or repel anything in the universe, or anything in the cosmos really, or anything you can even fathom. It can basically attach or entangle with that thing. Can we get the picture back up now? Thanks. The other one. Thank you. But so yeah, heart center, that's that. Magnetic field, that's where that interacts with. And you can even think of the solar plexus, which is associated with fire, lightning, plasma. You can think of that as the electric field. So now that we're moving on to Saturday, we're at Saturday. That's associated with the root chakra, which is at the base of the spine there. And this is where that dormant kundalini energy sits. If you're a guy, this is where like it's important for almost your reproductive organs hold like the seed energy. That's almost like untapped potential. It's vitality, and that's why when you retain that within yourself by doing things like seed retention or whatever, you're able to transmute that energy up. That's the force of procreation essentially at work. You have the ability to create life, and by keeping that within yourself, you're able to proliferate life and vitality throughout your being. So not wasting that is important. I'm not going to go into what that means. I think you guys can figure that out for yourself. But, essentially storing that energy within you and circulating it throughout the body is how you increase your vitality and increase your ability to develop. And even in the gym, this is why that's such a big trend, like seed retention in the gym, because you're able to feel stronger, you feel more connected to your body, you feel more grounded on the earth because you're connecting with the energy of the earth at the center. There's two chakras up there in the diagram, which are not actually in the diagram, which are, of course, the soul star chakra, which sits above the crown, actually, which is just pure divine essence, or I guess you could say cosmic energy beyond the crown center. And then you have the earth star chakra, which is actually below the root chakra. It's actually about a foot below the ground, or something of that nature. It's actually a certain point below the ground. It's below your feet, and that is the tethering aspect of the earth. But this is the tethering aspect of your own being, of your physical being, that tethers you to that. So if you think about the whole body as a magnet, you really have a better understanding of how human beings work, because essentially the human being is like one big antenna, and you're connecting to all this information out there. You're like a conscious antenna. You're interacting with circumstances and events around you, all this information, you're filtering it, whatever. But you got this antenna up here which connects you to the divine energy, and you got the antenna at your root center which connects you to the earth energy. So this is why they talk about like Father Sky and Mother Earth, because they're two polarities. They're two polarities of a magnet, of an electrode, of whatever, a circuit that works together. And once you understand that, the energy flows through these centers, and it must flow in rhythm. And if it does not flow in rhythm, that's what, in religious texts, they would describe that as falling, or why, some of the angels fell, especially in the big rebellion in heaven. They said 1/3 of the angels fell. This is why, is because when you disconnect from that circuitry, from the divine flow, you get this essentially aspect of disconnection from the flow of the field, from the divine flow of the field, I guess you could say. But it is a higher force of creation. So understanding that we operate on these rules of physics that most people don't look into, but all of this stuff is rooted in science. If you just look for it and connect the dots, it's there. Neuroscience, physics, chemistry, biology, all of those things are interlinked. Like, I don't want to preach here, but essentially, if you just look into science of how the human body works, all the evidence is there. And even like stuff like, I'm drinking tea right now, but essentially is based off water, right? Tea is like water. We are 75% water. Water absorbs and retains energy. It's even influenced by electric and magnetic fields. Science will tell you that, right? So that's why water conducts electricity, for example, if it has enough stuff in it. So, and we have enough stuff in the water for it to conduct. So we are essentially walking conductors of energy, 75% at least. The other, I guess you can consider yourself an insulator, the other 25%. But that's basically a basic rule. So, and all of these things are just basic rules of physics that we can apply back to the human body. And just because the Eastern philosophies have looked at it through spirituality, or said that okay, we got to look at it through chakras, that it doesn't mean that it's like worthy of mockery or whatever, because people have a different philosophy of looking at the same thing. It's the same thing, bro. It's just expressed differently. So once you understand that what they call science and what they call spirituality are two ends of the same spectrum, just like everything else in life, then you're really onto something big here. And we'll get back to the days of the week now. So Saturday, that is the root center, and that's where that dormant energy lies. And when you awaken it to its full potential, like, who knows, sky's the limit, bro. To be honest, like, literally, sky is the limit. So, but again, that just, involves building up your own being, building up your own self. You can work this center through exercise, or through grounding, or through any practices which tether you to the earth. People like to sometimes walk barefoot outside. I just walk outside, just walk around. It doesn't matter if you're barefoot or not, in my opinion. Of course, it helps if you're barefoot because you're physically in contact with the ground, but the principle is the same. The ground has an electric charge. You have an electric charge. When you walk on the natural surface of the ground, you pick up that charge. You're doing it all the time, no matter where you are on the planet. But when you're on soil, or when you're on rock or on earth, you are attaching to a natural flow or natural source of that charge. So that's the root center, and when that center is open, you're beyond the survival instinct. When that center is closed, you operate a lot from fear, a lot from oh yeah, maybe this will happen, or maybe that will happen, or whatever, and you're stuck within the lower centers. And the reason why this gets closed is because at the beginning of time, when like people were like Neanderthals and like drooling cavemen who were fighting with sticks and like had nothing to do but look at fire. I know it sounds like a pretty cool life compared to all the like hysteria these days, right? But essentially they did have to be aware of stuff like saber-toothed tigers, out there in the wilderness. So that's why the center gets closed, because you have to be aware of the environment. If you're always in fear, or worried about a predator being nearby, that's when the center gets closed. But in common world, now today, I would say it's even more prone to getting closed on a long-term basis, which actually can be pretty detrimental. And the reason why that happens is because typically this center is meant to act as a survival mechanism. So predator is nearby, you're engaged, you're like, you're almost, in your stance, like ready for the attack or ready for battle. And then once that force, or that countering aspect of your environment is gone, once you are not basically in confliction with something else in the environment, once you don't need to be aware of your survival, then it goes back to functioning properly, right? You go back to sleep, or go back to staring at fire, or whatever the cavemen were doing, right? But now you're worried about rent for like 2-3 weeks. The center gets blocked because you're worried about things that actually, even though they matter to us nowadays, they don't matter to what we're supposed to be as we were put on this planet. We've invented all these constructs of society that make us think about rent, or make us think about, oh, is that girl gonna message back, or whatever, or all these things that don't matter, right? So, and when you become fearful of those things on a long-term basis, it closes the center, and it acts the same way as if a predator was nearby, but it's not. And the thing is, again, as we talked about earlier, subconscious mind operates on repetition. So if you repeat that by, being worried about something that doesn't matter, or being always concerned, or, indoctrinated to these fear mentalities, or fear-mongering mentalities of survival, or just of overarching fear of whatever it may be, then, social constructs of social norms of whatever, it becomes closed. And then you are on a long-term basis of that being closed, and the body understands that, so it will not allow the energy to flow, because the body has said, oh, well, he's worried about this, that, the other thing, so it makes sense, let's just close the energy center down, because he doesn't need the higher aspects of the self. He's only worried about with, fearing this and that. So the energy cannot flow, because was it said that energy flows where attention goes, or something like that? So it's the same principle here. If you're worried about things that don't matter, that stress you out all the time, and you get worked up over, then you're susceptible to that center being closed. And then the dormant kundalini energy, that vital force, cannot flow, and the aura is just gonna dim, until you're not even like a lamp in the room anymore. You're just like a light that is turned off, bro, or like a light that is like barely on, right? But you should be almost like a laser to something, right? Or even it said, going back to Friday here, the heart center, it said in the Bible, the church of Thyatira, which we covered last week, it said that what was the quote from the Bible? And his eyes were unto a flame of fire. So that what that represents is that you have that laser focus, that laser mentality, or that laser aspect of mentality to something. You're focused on it, and you're reforging that energy to act in a direct way. And that's how you can reopen these centers, actually, because you need that flame which can reforge the sword, almost, or reforge the sword. So that is, the heart center. Oh, no, that is the root center. Excuse me, bouncing around a lot, but essentially we're covering everything into the in-depth here. So even if we don't get to the sins, this is more important, actually. So going on to final day of the week, Sunday, which is associated with the throat center, and this is associated with also the root center, again associated with Saturn, discipline, constructs. So life constructs, whatever, is important for building discipline and regiment, but don't let it get sucked into behavioral patterns, is what I would say for that. So just be aware of things like fear, aspects of survival, which are not necessary to always be concerned about, right? So again, Sunday, that's associated with the throat chakra, and this is associated with the planet, the sun. So the sun is pretty interesting because that is the source of all life in the solar system. So sun is really important at the center because it helps with expression. And the sun is literally, this object is so powerful that it's literally reverberating the flow of time. There would be no time itself without the sun. There would be no time on Earth because you can only experience a linear flow of time in perception to something else. So there would be no life on the planet if there was no sun. And you could go into the Einstein physics of all this stuff, but essentially it goes into the aspects of time dilation, and that the gravitational field of the sun is so much stronger than on Earth that it's actually bending space and time and creating the flow of time itself. So understanding that energy is the same energy in which gives life to the trees outside. Maybe not so much in winter, but even though they're still getting it, they're just in a different state, of course. But the principle is the same, that, the sun gives life to everything on the planet. Nothing can function without the sun. And it's really amazing how the, strongest source of energy in the cosmos is right above your head. And I'm not even talking about the crown at this point. I'm literally talking about what is outside, and you can go and recharge with anytime you want. Even if the clouds are blocking it, even if it's nighttime or whatever, you can still connect with this force. And this center is associated with sound because sound is what has the ability to bring things back to life. It has the ability to overcome the duality of karma, and it has the ability, this is said in the book, in the religious book of the Bible, that you have in quote, that you have a reputation for being alive, but you are not. And that is what this center is associated with. It's associated with the dead and clairaudience and the ability to perceive that subtle vibration of the cosmos, or the subtle vibrations in the cosmos. So when you awaken this center, this is really what gives you that vital life force energy in terms of connecting with your own individuality. Because when it comes to the aspects of your being, actually they've even done studies on on this that have shown that they measured the electromagnetic field around the body, and they've actually found that the force of love is not the strongest force in which they think it is in the body. The strongest force in the body, according to the electromagnetic dynamics, which are shown in like the what is it called, like when they connect the electrodes to the body and measure the energy coming off it. It's the aspect of the electric energy or aura basically coming off you. And they found that the thing that creates that the most is not love, but it's authenticity. And authenticity is associated with expression, and it's associated with the throat center, and it's associated with this energy, the energy of sun. So when you have that solar energy, you're able to connect with what it means to essentially be you, connect with the principles that represent yourself, connect with the authenticity of being you. You connect with the vitality of life. So again, this center, throat center, associated with sun, sacral center associated with moon. So this is, you can almost think of this as the divine masculine counterpart. And when you have those two together, you have the most unique aspect of creation there, because you are, again, 75% water. But what does water do when vibration hits it? It reverberates. It goes like this, you know? And when you create a beautiful sound, like a beautiful orchestra playing, and you have the water nearby, it's shown that the water actually forms beautifully. You know, there's a scientist, what's his face? Something Emoto. I did an episode on this before. And essentially what he did was play sounds near water and then freeze the water. And he found that the ones that would form beautiful shapes were the ones where he played beautiful and harmonic sounds near, and the ones where he played discoherent sounds or the music was garbage, essentially it didn't form beautiful shapes, right? Or coherent shapes or harmonic shapes. So understanding that vibration affects water and everything affects each other, just like this center is associated with, you could say, toroidal fields or resonance fields, which are sound fields, which operate different than magnetic fields, which is the center below it, the heart center, the magnetic field around your body, and then the center below that, the electric field around your body. These all work together, right? So it's all one symphony playing together. And if the symphony is out of tune, then you got like Squidward's band and it sounds like garbage, right? So you don't want Squidward's band, bro. Like, unless it's when he was actually playing good. But, you know, essentially you want a band that knows what they're doing and they're all playing together and they're all playing in flow and in harmony, because then you have music that sounds good, right? But if, you know, every instrument in the band is just doing what it wants, then you get this falling effect. So we'll wrap up talking just about some of the sins here. We're not going to go super in depth, but I want to focus on really one of the biggest ones, which is, you know, maybe one that Vegeta could take a note from. We'll talk about pride here. Pride, I would say, is actually one of the biggest aspects of these centers, but of course it has its moments where, you know, it can be it needs to be mitigated or I guess balanced in some sense, right? You could even see it in Avatar Last Airbender, when Uncle Iroh is teaching Zuko how to new firebending technique. He's teaching him how to create lightning, and Zuko can't do it because he's blocked by his pride. So essentially he's saying, you know, you need to learn humility, and it's the same aspect here. You need to learn the aspect of humility and what your limits are and what you think about yourself and your shame, and release that by being humble or understanding where your limits are and then overcoming that, right? So that's what's associated with that center. And I'm not going to go into each of the sins like as per the list. Maybe we could actually pull up the list of the sins, but Greed is another one. You could consider that really associated with the heart center, because if you're greedy, you don't want to like basically give love to anything but yourself. So that's associated with the heart, you could say. But by giving love, being in acceptance, being in connection with the universe, you have this harmonic flow of energy in which creation is able to give and take instead of just take or just give or whatever. Because when you have an imbalance of the energy flow, things do not function well. So lust, oh my god, this is one I would say this generation is far too familiar with, or maybe just people in general. But this comes into sacral center when we talk about sensuality and the aspects of a lot of what is occurring on the internet these days with just like clickbait, and everybody knows what I'm talking about here. But essentially overcoming that by understanding that there is aspects of being reserved, or being I guess reserved in what you take action with or connect with on a sexual or sensual level is important, because that also determines who you will be and how you interact and where you give your energy to. So that, and again, this is tied to your emotional center. So if you're overactive or over stimulated by these things all the time, it's going to have an effect on your mental and emotional balance, really more emotional than mental. So a lot of them you can kind of figure out here. Wrath, that's associated with, you could say the third eye, right? If you get too much into being angry or being just like against the world, then you're basically overutilizing a force, the masculine force, which is just meant to attack or be against something, right? So I'm sure you can figure out the rest of these. I don't need to elaborate on every single one of them, but essentially that covers the majority of what I wanted to cover here on the show today. So I guess maybe we could take off that image and I'll just wrap up here. But I'll just leave you kind of with me saying that understanding the aspects in which encapsulate or encompass society is important, because it helps understand your place in the world and relativity to everything else. Like Einstein talked about, there's only relativity. Basically, you can only understand who you are in relative to something else, right? Almost like you're looking in a mirror, right? So if the whole world was a mirror, you can only understand your relativity to something else, right? So anyway, a lot of big topics were covered today. We talked about the aspect of the days, we talked about the planets, we talked about the centers and the energy associated with each, we talked about the sins. So we covered a lot. This is, of course, Moonstruck right here on Riot Radio. I encourage you to like, subscribe, and follow me on social media to stay updated with the content that will be coming out. I will be starting another platform that is going to be known as the Sword of Mercury, in which we talk about a lot of these concepts associated with personal development and self-expression, and maybe geared to a bit more fitness than this show is, mainly tied to philosophy and stuff like that. So we'll get into that. We'll be doing some interesting exercises and bringing out potential to the fullest degree. So we'll wrap up here. This is again Moonstruck right here on Riot Radio, and I encourage you once again, like, subscribe, and thanks for watching. Have a good one.